Sorry to break up the conversation.
You all look so engaged.
Makes you feel badly. So maybe we could, some of you just might share some of your thoughts on those questions. So in terms of what is evaluation and assessment, do you think about that? Maybe the group in the back can start with a pair. And introduce yourself as well. So there's.
I'll start because then you'll do all the hard questions.
Okay.
So I'm Nancy Henning from Religious Studies, and Michelle is from OSIMA's community service shop, right? But for this purpose, it's community service shop. And so evaluation and assessment is you have some learning outcomes, you have some goals, and you're assessing whether you have a community measure, right? And so what is assessment? It's having an idea of what you're trying to achieve first, and then some way to measure how well that's it. That was an easy question, right?
That's sort of, yeah.
Michelle, take it from here.
And what are some of the ways that we can assess?
Well, we talked about qualitative ways more than quantitative, and so trying to have people giving students a rubric for what makes a good written reflection, and using the portfolio system, and trying to get students to do that. Then also working with the community partners and having some sort of an assessment there. And that's where we talked about a lot of challenges with partners that when you have one staff member or, very small organizations.
So we talked again about how to lessen the burden on them and yet still get feedback from them by providing a rubric.
Yeah.
That can just be checked through in a certain sense.
Great, and so then our challenge is community part. One thing that I should mention, the next session is going to be a community partnership, so we'll talk a little bit about one of the scorecards here is how to help work with community partnership. I think we'll focus more on the challenges and how we do that in the next session, just so you know we're not going to just get rid of the community, which is sometimes the case. Other thoughts on the meaning of assessment, some ways and some challenges if they didn't capture it. There's a lot of ways to look at assessment, so.
Well, I'll add a perspective here,
Okay,
which
great.
is I'm Rob Gerhardt, the Assistant Provost for Online Learning and Extended Studies. And Carol is Untitled Director?
Director of the Park Media Lab, so it's
Yeah.
part of Park Productions and the new Transmedia Studio.
Yeah, which is a very cool space down. Got to see it this weekend. Yeah, no, it's.
We should have the next session down there.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's a good
yeah.
idea. And it's in the community, they're
They're very
partners.
community-based for a reason.
Great.
Yes, let's go.
Yeah. So anyway, I was reflecting, and I think Carol has very similar experiences on service learning before I knew it was called service learning 20 years ago, where I would send students into the community sort of predefined projects to help develop a video program for our local nonprofit agency. They were usually around some kind of training or instructional piece, or it might have been an outreach piece of some kind. But what we talked a lot about was finding alignment between the process of getting the student to meet certain outcomes and the end product, which may or may not have satisfied what the community partner needed. And often there was an alignment between how much effort they put into working with the students and what the outcome of that end product was, but it wasn't a guarantee. So we talked a lot about us aligning those expectations and having those sort of process-oriented assessments along the way to make sure students were meeting their outcomes, and hopefully that aligned with the end product. Okay.
Right, so I think breaking down the process can help you have a conversation with the partner so that they understand better what, from your perspective, the outcomes might be in terms of the learning process, right? And then having the mirror conversation with them, the partner, about how the process will work for them and a breaking down of their goals that can be then balanced one by one with the process part, so that their product, can be aligned ideally with the expectations on both sides for what your outcomes are. That sounds like a lot of words. It seems like something I could draw it, but I can't. It's hard to define it.
You articulated that really well. It's that constant alignment
are we in alignment? Are the students meeting? Did we identify those goals early enough? Did we agree to those goals? And are they moving in a direction that it looks like it's going to result in what it is you anticipate?
Yes.
It is an ongoing process, and there are times when things will move off in directions that you didn't anticipate, and so as the person who's guiding the process, you have to have those snapshots along the way.
Yeah, exactly. And that also that the team is always a changing one, and it's not one that you know deeply or intimately before you start. So every student has a different set of skills and brings a different set of experiences to that moment, and they may or may not be able to achieve the goal. You just don't know until you get started with it. So that's always it's a moving target. Yeah.
One of the things I'm hearing in that also is just this tension between process and product, right? And so like, there's a certain way in which a service learning activity could be successful on a procedural level.
Yes.
All the steps were done.
Yes.
And yet the film at the end was a complete waste of everybody's time. It doesn't meet the product. But we get so focused on the product.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And then there's success and failure tied to that when it could have been an incredibly good learning experience.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I think having that conversation really early on in the process.
Yeah, really setting
a partnership. Yeah. It's good.
So that formative and summative, so assessment can be formative and it can be summative, which is a really important distinction to make, and the other piece is it can be developmental. So there's a formative, there's a summative, there's a developmental, particularly in a learning environment where you're wanting students to develop particular skills, knowledges, and so on, so you're not actually making a judgment necessarily on a developmental scheme, but you're stopping and you're saying, where are you now in this, and how do we readjust? So that formative, summative, developmental is really important. Did you all have anything to add to those?
Well, we talked a little bit more about ways to assess or evaluate once you have your goals or student learning outcomes, and coming from the arts, participation is usually a way that we will look at meeting our goals, because there's usually a participation outcome there. You can have tests of the students, tests of the people that you're working with, surveys of any population. An essay or reflection, we talked a lot about that as well. And then also having a focus group and bringing key players together for a formal evaluation of the program when it's done. I think it's easy to set those goals and, kind of work to make sure they're met, but often we forget the evaluation step at the end when we bring everyone to the table and say, how did that go and what will we do differently in the future?
Nice.
Yeah, ours, pretty much everything that we had in mind were captured. I think we also thought, that defining the goals, and expectation and being very, very clear early on about, those goals that the community partner and the us are trying to achieve, that are realistic, that are measurable, that the timeline and resource at all that is probably one of the most important earliest challenges in doing that, and then the assessment, that is, we can define the scope of the assessment in so many ways, at the course level, at the activity level, project level, and that it has to be an ongoing assessment and sort of recalibrating and moving forward, so yeah, pretty much it.
Yeah, and those, go ahead.
Oh, no, he said it.
And then what's really key also is it may very well be that the goal is more the response to how students are experiencing a particular situation. So it's that could be sort of a reflective judgment goal that you have in helping them develop a reflective disposition. So you're watching that process over time, and hopefully you're getting better and better at how they're reflecting. And so it begs the question about whether or not that's even a learning outcome, and then is there a framework that you're assessing that they're trying to achieve. So I brought some resources around the ways that you help assess in terms of reflective resources that I'll pass out when we do our exercise. One thing I did also want to point out in terms of the evidence, that quality evidence that shows that they're achieving certain learning outcomes. And I'm just going to pass out something from our Center for Teaching Excellence that I think is really helpful at Cornell. It talks about direct and indirect measures. And so, of course, direct measures are more robust types of evidence, indirect evidence, because it's more students' perception of their learning is not as, it could be way off in terms of the direct observation of what someone might be learning, whether it's the skills, knowledge, attitudes, or behaviors. And I'll also pass out just one other, and these are just sort of resources for you to think about when you're thinking about assessment. The first part of this is I just took from Middle States. And Middle States actually has really nice resources around assessment, even though it might scare you.
I like that look of surprise.
I think they've really honed it down to an art. So lots of examples of rubrics, and I mean, it's actually really useful. So don't be scared of an accrediting body. They actually have some. People tend to just like, oh God, if you say Middle States, they run far away. But actually, accrediting bodies are the ones that really put together a lot of nice resources. So it's just another way of looking at some of these types of evidence, which I think is really important to think about when you're crafting an assessment plan. Is how can you show whether or not they've really achieved these learning outcomes, and what would that evidence look like? And somebody mentioned e-portfolios, and I'll also give you some resources on e-portfolios, and a nice kind of bibliography put together by a guy named Darren Cambridge, who's really one of the foremost e-portfolio experts out there. And those are really nice, direct ways of compiling direct evidence of student achievement. And it also takes it one step further. It helps students evaluate whether or not they think they've achieved the learning outcomes set forth. And it may very well be negotiated with them, some component of that as well, before you start the course. So e-portfolios take it one step further. You're actually asking them to integrate their learning in some way and then evaluating it. So I think that's a really advanced learning skill for students. So to think about that as well when you're thinking about assessment.
Can I add one piece about, I thought that was a really good point that the two of you were making about kind of product versus process. One thing that has surprised me over the past 10 years is I was so focused on the product of, our students creating great development materials that can be used, that can actually seek and pin down some funding for a particular project. I've had community partners come back to me at times and say, well, the proposal still needed tweaking. We changed our mind about the budget features, but the process pushed us forward. It challenged us. You were pushing your students, they were pushing us, we were pushing our board, they were pushing back on us, but it propelled us forward in a way that if we hadn't gone through this process with you, we wouldn't be where we are now. So I was always surprised by how their measures of success sometimes were not what I was anticipating or what I was kind of focused on.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe thinking about that process as other ways to measure the success of the partnership. In creative ways. On that note, do you want me to talk?
Sure.
So how do you take 10 years of evolution and boil it down to a few minutes? So what I've decided to do here is give you lots of takeaways, talk to you a little bit about how the course has changed over the past decade, and then offer an open invitation to spend some individual time with any of you if you are in the process of developing a course proposal or thinking about a program or a project in the community and would like to just kind of pick my brain a little bit. So again, apologies to the trees. I'll take one just as reference. So as I said, I came back specifically because I missed the classroom and student development, and I was getting a little tired of just constantly chasing funding, which is what I was spending most of my time doing at Cornell. So I decided to teach students how to do that. That was my motivation. The other part of it, and I think that thinking about your personal motivation for why you engage also in service learning activities or civic engagement, I was doing a lot of pro bono work in the community with a variety of organizations and kind of, pulling myself in so many different directions. And I kept thinking, well, if I mentor students in order to do some of this work, I'm also kind of taking my expertise and I'm being more efficient, more effective with it, right? So part of my motivation is attached to me. It's a very personal piece. I grew up in a family that was civically engaged. My dad was always promoting, and my belief as a writer is that my purpose in the world is, to make the world a better place somehow. So there is a personal motivation, and I think that's actually a healthy place for all of you to start with this. Kind of what is your connection and your motivation? Because it's kept me engaged for a long time, and it's kept me kind of interested in learning more and looking at promising practice.